The ability to discuss a topic such as free will requires a consciousness which can form abstract concepts. If you understand the meaning behind those words, you can discover that which you call free will is your mind's freedom to think or not. You can discover this by examining what you do when you think. The problem is most people don't know how to introspect. This is caused by combinations of bad philosophies that taught them how to hush their freedom to think for whatever reason. These philosophies prevent them from properly examining their self-made soul. This freedom to turn off your thinking can be automized, and this leads to what we call a blankout, which can be demonstrated visually in clips across YouTube titled X Destroys Y.
Okay, that was epic.
For example, in talking to a flat earther, they might bring up the idea that density makes things fall down. And when you point out that density is a scalar, and that it states mass per volume, and says nothing about direction, and that in fact the vector that makes the higher density sink lower is due to gravity of a round Earth, the flat earther usually replies with an insult, a new topic, or by never responding again. This is a blankout. They were offered evidence that would force them to change their beliefs, and they chose to stop thinking to avoid it.
In free fall, a density column loses its any direction for it to align itself and becomes completely mixed. How do you explain that? If gravity is nothing but relative density, how do you explain that?
Because the objects are falling.
If you're saying that they're falling, then I'm telling you, you're proving me right.
They don't separate out. We're on a ball. And gravity is real. They don't separate out.
Go childish with it as much as you want.
Explaining this as a determinist is a challenge. You'd have to explain why the animal is faced with new exterior information, but because of old beliefs, their choice for the old option is not a free choice. Perhaps it is because they fear the loss of family and friends if they change, but now the determinist has to answer why they feel like they can change if they don't have the freedom to change, and why making an irrational choice to be with a cult is not a free choice. Or better yet, how did man evolve to make irrational choices based solely on responding to a rational world? The determinist will have to bat off examples of free will one after another in order to defend their choice to believe that free will is an illusion. So what is free will? That which you call free will is your mind's freedom to think or not. Just like the first two videos in this playlist, we are going to start from the beginning of the topic. Free will is a mind's freedom to think, and therefore we can begin at the beginning of consciousness, at the beginning of a life. Man's earliest ancestors were sensory. Senses are what distinguish consciousness from non-consciousness. Senses allow an entity to observe existence in some capacity. Rocks do not have the capacity to sense. They interact with existence but cannot sense existence. Death is the loss of all your sensations and mechanisms. A rock cannot die. It cannot lose a life it never experienced. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. An amoeba is alive because it acts to sustain its life and generate movement and reparative actions in order to do so. It survives only on its sense of chemical gradients. A sense is just the ability to detect a contrast. Life, then, is the ability to self-sustain and self-generate by acting based on sense experiences, which are caused by detecting contrasts that exist in reality. An amoeba lives by detecting chemical gradients of food and moving towards it, and by detecting gradients of poison and avoiding it. A plant lives by detecting the contrast between light and dark, the differences caused by the chemical gradient of soil. They also have a sense of touch, sound, and a sense for detecting gravity. In each case, the senses detect something real and contrasting about reality in order to help keep itself sensing. In this case, the contrast between light and dark, pH levels, pressure versus no pressure, sound versus silence, and the difference in gravitational pull. A higher level animal is no different in the sense that it has senses which allow it to survive, and without them it would be dead. However, higher level animals have percepts. This is the level at which we left off at in the metaphysics video for humans. Infants are at the same level as many multicellular animals, which is the level of perception. Perception is the stage at which single stimuli are integrated into a whole unit, thus providing the conscious observer an identifiable object. Like going from a close-up to a faraway view of an impressionist painting, the pieces of sensory awareness become a whole object, a painting in this case. Percepts, unlike sensations, are retained by memory. This ability to retain information for later use is an evolutionary step up from the sensational level, which has no memory, and even if it did, it would be one of an undifferentiated chaos. The perceptual animal has a lot more senses than its pre-perceptual ancestors, and in order to use those senses, some sort of network of information integration and retention is needed. The first ancestor that developed a second sense, say the light spot, would have to either hold one sense in memory while the other sense triggered its actions, and then respond to the held sense after, and or the organism had to develop a way to do both actions based on both senses at the same time by integrating the connections. As our ancestors evolved over millions of years, senses were added or dropped depending on whether the ability to distinguish those contrasts were useful or not. This led to higher-level perceptual animals which integrated their senses in such a way that they were able to distinguish not just contrasts, but individual objects. The integration from all of the contrasts between the object and the rest of the world allowed them to automatically view and interact with objects, and having this ability to identify objects, they have the ability to temporarily ignore their other senses. In order to learn certain things, perceptual animals sometimes need to focus and think. If it is the objectivist view that free will is the mind's freedom to think or not, can it be said that since an animal may focus and learn, that an animal can also have free will? To examine the way animals think compared to humans, we can use, for simplicity's sake, Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development as the stages at which to compare animals to humans. Stage 1. The sensory motor stage, ages 0 to 2, is the stage where the infant starts with having only sensations, which is common to all life. This is the stage where the sensations of the exterior world are providing the infant the integrations which will lead to percepts and concepts. See my metaphysics video if you have not. Stage 2. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7, is a stage of human development where children have learned symbolic functions and they believe that everything is alive and that everything thinks like they do from their perspective, which leads them to hiding by covering their own faces. This is the level which most dogs are at. Your dog can understand the symbolic function of a word or a gesture, demonstrated by its ability to do certain non-random tricks to certain hand gestures or words. They too will hide their face in an attempt to hide from you. Learning is a process of memorization at this stage. Stage 3. The concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11, is the stage where children discover logic and concrete cognitive operations such as sorting. This is also the stage that children develop inductive reasoning. This stage is above most dogs, but even dogs can reach this stage. 2 examples. One is a Doberman that can sort objects into various categories without any knowledge of previous training or influence. The other is a Border Collie that is trained, which can remember and find 1,000 named toys, and when introduced to a never-before-heard name, the dog induced that the others are not the new name, and therefore the new toy has the new name and return the correct toy. This stage has also been reached by certain birds and primates. Learning at this stage remains memory-based, and the use of logic is concrete-based. Stage 4. Formal operational stage, ages 12 plus. This is the stage that man alone exists. This stage does not simply require integration, it requires abstraction, an ability that man alone possesses. In fact, it is this type of mind that separates man from animal in each of the previous stages. Even while sharing a stage of development, the children are far superior. Every child excels in comparison to a lucky few from another species. This is because of the kind of mind that man possesses. Man is a rational animal, a being of volitional choice. Other animals may perform logic and focus some of the time, but for the most part, they need only rely on instincts. Man has no choice in that he must make volitional choices, or he will not survive. Imagine a naked man trying to hunt with just his hands and teeth as weapons, feet too if the prey is low enough to the ground. The form of man's body and the use of his mind, compared to that of other animals, should be evidence enough to convince most people that what human evolution favored was a rational mind over primitive tool-like claws and fangs. There is nothing supernatural about a series of evolutionary events that led to cognitive choice, and the only difference between man and animal is that man's ability to abstract, meaning man's ability to have a selective mental focus that takes out or separates a certain aspect of reality from all others, meant he no longer required instincts. Man's evolution exchanged claws for tools. Evolution doesn't require changes to be driven by exterior factors. Evolution is driven by survival. Those that survive get to pass on their genes, as that is what it means to survive in evolutionary terms. Those that eat get energy. Those that get eaten provide their energy. The ability to use tools increased the amount of energy received by the body. Those tool users survived and taught their children how to use the tools. Man's evolutionary trend followed naturally. In a competition of resources between a tribe of tool-using pre-planning hominids versus a tribe of animal-like instinctual hominids, the tribe that knew what their enemies would do, how to counter those actions, and therefore which tools to bring to make it easier, will win. The ability to observe an object is great, but the ability to choose to focus on an object, to abstract out its attributes, so as to produce tools and actions from those objects' attributes is even better. An ape can know the concrete bound logic of picking up a rock to throw it at an opposing shrewdness of apes, to injure or scare them away, but a man can pick up a rock, abstract out the fragility of some of the minerals, the strength of others, and in understanding that concrete bound logic and applying it to the abstraction, he can form a plan to produce spears from certain rocks. Animals' cognitive evolution from sensation to perception helped develop the automatic emotional mechanisms that would help guide an animal when it comes to making value judgments, such as fear, surprise, joy, and anger. Man's cognitive evolution from percepts to concepts helped develop the automatic emotional mechanisms that would help guide a human when it comes to making value judgments, such as pride, guilt, shame, confidence, etc. Man has more emotional mechanisms than any other species, because for man it is worth spending the energy on barometers of value judgments, as all man can do is make value judgments. Other animals don't require feelings of self-disgust, and this allows them to survive as they can find nutrients in feces. This will not do for a species that has evolved only to make value judgments. So if it is just natural that consciousnesses that can perceive a vast amount of data must make choices between which objects they are going to focus on, and that man alone simply evolved the ability to reason, i.e. abstract, i.e. evolve the ability to mentally integrate two or more units possessing the same distinguishing characteristics with the particular measurements omitted, why then is there a debate on whether free will exists or not? My answer goes like this. Man has not cognitively evolved for the last 20,000 years. The technology we have today isn't the metaphysically necessary, it is man-made, and the men that made it did so with the same brain power as their caveman ancestors. If you take away all of the technology from the last 20,000 years, and with it the concepts everyone has about them, how do you think you, your friends, and your family would behave in such a world? Notice how people tend to talk about how history repeats itself. History is not the thing that is repeating. History is an abstract concept that doesn't actually metaphysically exist. What repeats is the cognitive development of a fetus to an adult. History repeats because of the fact that no matter what technology you put in a man's hands, he is still the same animal he was 20,000 years ago. Man has made strides by having individuals that chose to think about one object at a time, and using their ability to abstract a concept out, they were able to produce a concrete object made from existing entities, and designed for the purpose of self-sustaining and self-generating their life. In teaching the new generation about the old generation tools, the new generation comes into the world automizing these tools as metaphysically given and necessary, but that is a failure of the young mind. Suddenly, one day, after approximately 19,500 years of abstracting, inventing, passing on, automizing, society reached a point where some rich kid that has never had to work a day in his life can sit back in his chair in front of a fireplace and state that there is no such thing as free will because the masses just seem to automize, and what they can't explain about their behavior must be God, and therefore man has no choice. What causes people to believe that free will is an illusion is the fact that they have not introspected, that they have automized their percepts and memorized their concepts, but haven't stopped to understand what and how they know what they know. As an example, here is a short clip of a flat earther doing abstract logic.
That perhaps as you get higher up, you get less and less pressure, it gets colder and colder, and in some kind of electromagnetic way, you end up getting liquid gases. And why not? That would give us this blue.
If you understand anything about pressure, temperature, states of matter, electromagnetism, or how the sky is blue, then you know why this is wrong. This man clearly never reached the formal operational stage of development, or he is choosing to be irrational by choice, and is using concrete logic and memorized meaning to rationalize a conclusion based on the automatic percepts without a drop of understanding. It is this kind of thinking, a rearranging of words without their proper meaning attached due to ignorance or blankout, that leads them to the belief that volitional thought is determined. Determinism is an illusion. It is only in the mind of a rational animal, a mind that can invent fiction out of reality to rationalize a belief system, that can state that free will is an illusion. It is only in the mind of animals that can discover and then imagine violating the basic axioms, an animal capable of inventing anti-concepts like duty, ethnicity, and consumerism, in which such a deceitful term like determinism can exist. Reaching the conclusion that free will is an illusion can only be accomplished by rejecting the metaphysics that existence exists or that consciousness is conscious. Illusion is an abstract concept based on the characteristic of sense distortion, and to know such a concept requires a focused consciousness. Thus the statement free will is an illusion is a contradiction. In its full context, it states the ability to abstract concepts like illusion is an illusion. How can those that hold this position hold such a position? By not being formal operational thinkers, but by being concrete operational thinkers, i.e. by choosing not to think. Instead of understanding concepts, they memorize the sounds tied to a symbol. The word illusion to them is the symbol for a parlor trick. People are fooled by intellectually created sense distorters, and therefore people can be tricked by their senses. Therefore, how can we know anything? Maybe existence is not entirely knowable, or maybe God did it. The conclusions reached by a process of reason are objective. The alternative to reason is some form of mysticism or skepticism. In order to get a better grasp on your mind's freedom to think or not, we will explore reason, abstraction, concept formation, and more in the video on epistemology. If you liked the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. First to comment gets to ask a question for a Q&A video. And if you like my work in general, why not put your money where your values are and join patron Alex and I in furthering the objectivist philosophy so that we may all be free.